Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Ed Parcaut of Helping the Brave. Let's bring in our guest today, Joel Bouchard. How you doing, Joel?
I'm doing good.
All right. We, of course, as a podcasters, we always talk before we go live and go through a lot before we get on. But I want to go back through what we talked about because I want everybody to know about it. The first questions I always ask to start the show is, what service did you choose, and why did you pick that service?
So I was in the Army Reserve, and I chose it because, long story short, right? I wanted to shoot guns, right? I wanted to be out in the field. I wanted to be a soldier, right? I want to do that kind of stuff. I scored a 98 on my ASVAB, and the guy who administered the test actually kept me afterwards. He said, "Can you hang back?" And he said, "Listen, with a score like yours, you could do whatever you wanted." He said, "You could go in the Air Force, be a translator or something, nice cushy job." I said, "Nah, it doesn't sound great. I want to do something that's active." So I went Army Reserve, um, and yeah, it was basically because growing up, I had always thought about being a soldier, and both my grandfathers were in World War II. Um, and then growing up and being an adult, I was initially talked out of it when I was 18 by my dad, and so I went to community college, got an associate's degree. Um, I've loved school my whole life. I'm studying for a PhD right now in psychology, and after I got my associate's degree, I applied to a 4-year school and saw the tuition bill and said, "Ooh, I can't pay this." And I know the way student loans work, and I was not into it. And I said, "You know what? I've gone to college. I've always wanted to be a soldier. I let my dad talk me out of it. Go to college, see what it's about. Go on." And I said, I still want to do it. So I signed up, and that's pretty much the service I joined and why.
All right. Now, for us who don't know this, the reserves, they pay you to go to school, or?
Yeah, yeah. So there's uh, there's a GI Bill. It's not the same as active duty, but they give you a set amount while you're in, and that covered my bachelor's degree completely. And then for my master's and my doctorate, I'm attending a yellow ribbon school, so that kind of caps the tuition at $250 a credit hour, which for a doctoral program is a steal. So still no student loans. Going into the PhD, still no student loans, so you can't beat that.
All right, yellow ribbon school means for people who don't understand.
Yeah, it's just a military friendly school. It's a school that's usually what it means is when they say yellow ribbon, they're capping tuition at a rate that will allow the Montgomery GI Bill to pay for it if you're using the GI Bill. GI Bill taps out at $250 a credit hour. So if you attend one of these schools, your GI Bill will cover up to $250, and then the school discounts the tuition to $250, so you can go for free.
And how do
But
you?
the nice thing is, some of these yellow ribbon schools is even if you don't have the GI Bill, they still cap the tuition at the 250. So you can pay out of pocket the $250 a credit hour when a PhD program is $800 a credit hour or whatever.
Wow, wow. No, I was just because I haven't heard the term yellow ribbon school before. See, then you think, well, you should have heard everything. Well, you'd think that, but I don't hear everything.
Yeah,
It's all
yeah.
new stuff. And when people say acronyms or whatever, I always want to explain it because somebody else might be watching this who hasn't went in, who might want to go, oh, all right, that's a route I want to go, because I don't care how you serve as long as you chose to serve.
Right.
And I think some people get discouraged about coming on the show because of how they serve. No, you signed online. Just because you chose to go a different route than somebody else doesn't mean it was a wrong route. It just means that was a route for you. Um, and you were in the reserves for 6 years, 8 years.
Yeah, so all contracts are 8 years. It just depends on how it's split up between active and inactive reserve. Which inactive reserve is you're just not doing anything. Yeah.
I know, because that was
So
the end of my service. I had 6 months of inactive reserve.
gotcha. Yeah. So I had 6 years of active reserve, 2 years of inactive reserve. So from 2012 to 2018, I was an active reservist.
Now and that, for people who don't understand, that means you do 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. playing games or stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Yep. So, a couple fun training exercises, during the summer, that type of thing. But for the most part, yeah, it's just going on your weekends and passing your PT test, passing your shooting, uh, you know, working with your night vision goggles, doing PMs on your trucks, all that type of stuff.
And what people don't realize is when I got out, everybody asked me, "Are you going to go in the reserves?" I said, "No, because you can be called up to go back and serve." And they're like, "Oh, it'll never happen." And then they actually created the reserves to be so large that they could pull from that during the time of war, and they did drastically pull from that. I've interviewed many guys who were reserve they did 60 months over there, which is unheard of. For the active duty don't do that much at all, but these reservists have done a ton of time over there. So you were lucky not to have to go, and just like myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of NCOs, who were reserves their whole career who had done 2 or 3 tours, when I was in. So, yeah, it definitely happens. That's one of the biggest misconceptions that some people have is, "Oh, if I go in the reserves, it's safe." It's like, "Yeah, okay, I just do my weekend thing and then I'll go to college." But, no, they told us when, in 2012, that certainly wasn't at the height of the Iraq War or anything, but it was still going on, and, the, they told us when we were going in, they said, we were in an auditorium and they said, look around this auditorium. Every single one of you is going to go overseas. And I think that they were probably mostly correct. The only reason I didn't, was because my unit was brand new. It was, established in 2011. I joined 2012. We were supposed to be on a 5-year cycle. So in 2017, we were supposed to deploy. We didn't end up having enough people. There was still a period of time there towards the end, 2017, 2018, where we were on a 3-day notice. If anything went off with North Korea, we had bags packed, and we had to be off the ground in 18 hours, regardless of where you were, what you're doing for a job. But nothing ever became of it.
Now, so you went in at what was your MLS?
I was a 92 Alpha Romeo 1, so
For the
92 Alpha
layman
logistics
people is
specialist. Yeah, 92 Alpha is a logistics specialist. Romeo 1 is an identifier for a wretch operator. So I drove one of the bigger vehicles in the Army. It picks up like railroad car boxes from the top and can drive around.
and
Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
did you do that when you got out or while you're out?
I wish. Here's where I wish I joined the Air Force, right? The Air Force is really good about licensing, the airmen, giving them license that transfer to the civilian world. The Army doesn't do that. So, no, none of my training really counted towards an outside civilian job. But
Yeah, I talked to a guy from the Pentagon, and they're trying to change that to where that your experience directly relates to outside so that you can get picked up. Because we did an Operation Firewalk this last year in April where everybody walked on coals, kind of like a Tony Robbins event, but it was a motivational get you through your stuff. And one of the guys that was there was an engineer. He goes, "I can't get hired by anybody, and I'm an engineer." And he
mm,
learned in the military, and so I was talking to some people about that, but somebody like that needs to go to like the big companies that deal a lot with the military. They understand the difference, but to be stuck to that, that's just horrible.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of guys who have a lot of skills. My job, it wasn't easy, um, but it wasn't what some of these other guys do, and to get out and not really have a path forward in their field is a travesty.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at your stuff. Philosophy, huh?
Yeah, yeah,
Why did you pick? So let's talk about schooling. So you went to school, got your
sure.
bachelor's, got a master's. What'd you get your master's in?
So my
Where you,
master's degree was in education,
where you going?
higher education. Um, yep, working on a PhD in psychology.
Right.
Lots of people ask me what I'll do once I have my doctorate, and the answer is probably study something different. I'm thinking about maybe going for physics next, or maybe even working on a pilot's license. I'm not sure.
So
But
what do you do
yeah,
for a living?
so for a living, I'm the production manager for a manufacturing facility that makes parts for the safety industry and for the electrical industry. So if you're driving on the road, you look up at the power pole, you see those kind of rubber and metal things that hold the electrical lines in place. We do a lot of the production of those things. So, long story short, my job pays a lot more than a PhD in psychology usually does, anyways. So it's not. I'm not going to school for an educational opportunity. I'm just somebody that loves school, loves learning, loves doing new things.
So your long-term goal to teach at a college?
Yeah, I'm thinking that'll probably be my retirement gig. Is when I'm done working full time, teach some classes on the side or something.
How did you get into so a lot of times I talk to people about transitioning. You didn't have the traditional transition to get into the job that you have now. So when you got out of college, how did you get into the job you have now?
So I live in kind of a rural area. So
Where do
you
you
have
live?
two options. You can either work at one of the few places nearby, or you have to drive an hour away to one of the big cities in one of three different directions. Um, I like to. I started, in the local area, and I found a company that was um, looking for somebody to do uh, kind of shipping and inventory control, that type of stuff. And so I was logistics in the Army, and I had an associate's degree, even though it wasn't really applicable to the job. Education does show companies that, hey, you have skills working with computers, you have some follow through, that type of thing. So I got my foot in the door, about 10 years ago, and then just worked my way up through the ranks there.
Joel, I didn't ask you, where are you located?
I'm in Western New York, so kind of east of Buffalo.
Okay. Um, a lot of manufacturing around there?
Uh, there
Because
used to be a lot, and now there's some coming back. Um, it's still not quite as built up as it was, back in the heyday of, the Rust Belt and all that type of stuff. But you're starting to see some of the big companies come back. We had Tesla build a factory a few years ago nearby, and there's some microchip things going on, that type of stuff.
the reason I bring up, there's an index that we follow. I'm in the mortgage industry, and it's about manufacturing, and it's out of New York. I mean, it's out of that. I'm like, really? There's manufacturing in New York area? And they're like, yeah, this is I was like, okay, things you don't know for not living there. So
Yeah, it's a tough area to have manufacturing because the minimum wage is so high that a lot of companies go, well, we could drive 3 hours across the border to Pennsylvania and pay workers half as much money. So how do you compete? And you have to be pretty savvy about it in order to stay in business and capture business. But
well, that's like us in I'm in California. The minimum wage for working at fast food's $20 an hour. It's
yeah, I think you're the
ridiculous.
only ones beating us.
Yeah. I mean, In and Out in our area, they pay amazing well, but they're slammed with business all the time, so they can't afford it. But somebody like a McDonald's, who, yes, they're busy, but they don't, and not busy enough. They have to use technology to get along, because they can't afford $20 an hour for a person to say, what would you like? Would you like to upsize that?
Yeah,
That's just,
yeah,
it's expensive. People don't understand. It's like, you're not supposed to be at one of those jobs to have a family. That's supposed to be a starter job while you're going to college, while you're doing this other stuff. And people think it's a long term. No, it's not a long term gig unless you own the place.
right. Yeah. Yeah, you see a lot of kiosks replacing workers around here for sure. And you can't blame the people completely because the middle class really got hollowed out when all the manufacturing went overseas.
Mhm.
And so your options are you either have to sort of get higher education and go into tech, or you have to you have to go get a trade, and go that direction. But I'm not sure if everybody went those two routes, if there'd be enough jobs for everybody that way either. I don't know. It's just
Trade, we are so far behind on trade. It is ridiculous. They need tradesmen like nobody's business. Everybody's in their 50s retiring in the next 10 years. We're going to be so short on trades that there's like 400,000 jobs that they need people in the trades right now.
man,
And it's so
it's
much
crazy.
that they're pushing women more than anybody else to go into trades.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't
I
know
do.
that.
Yeah, it's I do so many different shows and everything else that I do a real estate show, and I talk to so many people, and I know a lady locally in my Rotary who puts on, and they do sponsors for women to go into trades to learn the actual trade. That's how they're paid, and they can start off as a making $80,000 a year just first year easily.
Wow.
And then you keep moving up, you'll be 150 in no time. The only thing close to that is being a nurse in California. Nurses start off at 120 to $140,000 a year. And
Wow.
there's an industry that's never going to run out of people.
Right. Yeah,
We're all
absolutely.
getting older and sicker. All right. So it sounds to me like you're a full-time student, meaning that you'll go to school forever as long as you can because you enjoy learning stuff,
Yeah.
learning different things. But
Yep.
and is that how come you got it? Because you have a podcast also. How did you get into podcasting? Because I got into it because I had a radio show that I created because of my mortgage industry and the stuff I do in the real estate industry. I had a local radio show that I still do. I turned that into a podcast afterwards to hit a totally different market. And then I started creating other podcasts from the fact that I did that and understood that. How did you get into podcasting?
Yeah, I started on the music side. So I'm a musician. I've got 5 albums online, a bunch of EPs and singles and stuff. So uh I've got a recording studio that I'm in right now. I record all the instruments separately and mix them together and release some music. So 6 years ago, I'm looking around. I go, hey, I'm always looking for something new to do, and I go, I've got all the stuff. Why don't I just do a podcast? I'm like, well, what would I do, Don? Well, my favorite topic is philosophy. So I called up my old philosophy professor after 10 years of not talking to him and just said, hey, you want to do a podcast? He said, sure. And yeah, the rest is history.
And how long have you been doing the podcast?
So 6 years, 6 years exactly. So
Weekly, I assume. One episode a week?
yeah,
Or
we try. We're pretty laid back about it. I think we're approaching 200 episodes now. Um, but we don't monetize anything. We don't run any commercials. I don't get real in depth with like the notes or the metadata or anything. We just try to have good conversations and then put them out there. And if anybody wants to listen to them, they can. But it's done pretty well. Just kind of growing organically. So
no, I'm just curious because people want to know if they start a podcast, how, consistency is the number one thing. Your people need to know when you're going to drop it. You can tell them you're taking time off. I had one of the number one in the country. I'm talking the world, actually. I took 6 months off and it dropped because I got it was my other one called Inner Edison, which is your greatest accomplishments come from your greatest defeats. And it's about business. It was doing really well. I mean, so well. And then I stopped it for 6 months because people didn't want to talk about their failures. And I was getting upset. I was like, do I want to continue on with this if people are going to do this? And so I finally came back to the fact I do want to continue on, but you have to talk about your failure. You're not going to be released. And coming back, I still haven't gone back to those numbers at all. So just
wow.
all I'm putting it out there, just be careful if you set up, you're going to drop every week on a certain time. But people are probably used to you guys. What do you do? Record a few and then release them, or do you record? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah. So coming from the music background, I'm gotten pretty comfortable with like the audio editing and stuff. So it doesn't take me too long to run through it. So normally, he'll come over Saturday morning, we'll record the episode, and an hour and a half later, I've got it up. So um yeah, pretty fast, pretty fast paced. But yeah, we shoot for every week, but we're both pretty busy, so we'll skip a week here or there. But yeah, starting out, certainly consistency is key. I think there's some crazy statistic like 90% of podcasts don't make it 10 episodes or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
so I came up with the 10-23 rule of podcasting. That's my actual come up with because I found out that 80% of podcasts die after the 10th episode, and then another 10% is gone by the 23rd episode. So you only 10% of the podcasts that started are still out there.
wow. Yeah, yeah, you hear something like that, and if I had to guess, it's consistency on the host part, and it's also probably false expectations, as well, because I think there's people that just think, oh, okay, I'll just start this thing out and it will instantly be some kind of success, and you go, no, you have to grind it out for a while before you start seeing people showing up to listen,
Yeah.
But once they kick off, they tend to kind of snowball. They sort of picks up on its own. So, and that's a reason, I like doing guest appearances too, is, hey, you get the word out about your show. You get to interact with other people. This Monday, I've got a guy who I was a guest on his show. He's coming to be a guest on my show. So you meet interesting people. You can have, and you bring interesting guests to your show, and you also get the word out about your show on other people's episodes. So it's good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I enjoy interviewing people because I want to know why people do certain things. I tell people it's what I used to get in trouble with, sitting with my wife around a table asking people questions, why they voted a certain way, why they did this, why they did that. She'd be squeezing my leg to tell me to shut up. And now I don't have her next to me and I can ask anything, but I want to know. And I've been in sales forever. And so these are questions I want to understand you as a person, so I make sure that I do what's right for you. Well, it's the same thing when you're interviewing somebody. You want to listen to that person, hear what they say, and then ask questions about what they've said. And a lot of people go, really, you actually listen to what I say? Because they're used to a lot of podcast hosts who don't listen to you. They have so many questions they want to ask you, and that's all they want. Because I've had many of them reach out to me that want guests who want to come on and say, can you send me some questions so I'm ready? I'm like, no, there is no questions. It's a conversational podcast. It's not a question and answer podcast.
And that's the way all the good podcasts are, because I've definitely been on bad podcasts where you go, yeah, they ask you a question and you give an in-depth answer, and then you're expecting them to follow up, and instead they ask something unrelated, and you go, oh, okay. And I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody else. I've come in with a list of questions that I've wanted to ask and have forced some. But over the years, I find myself getting away from that, right? I try to go in with roughly one question for every 10 minutes that I expect the podcast to last. And sometimes I don't ask a single question, right? But sometimes I ask all three. But usually, you're asking 20 questions, but it's just those other 17 are based off of what the other person said. It's not something you can script or plan ahead of time.
And you have another host, right? At the same time?
Yeah, I've got a resident expert. He's the guy who does 95% of the shows with me. We'll have guests on eventually, occasionally that meet certain interests that kind of jive with the philosophy topic. But
the reason I'm asking, because when you have a second person on there asking questions to a guest, it can sometimes take the podcast in a totally different direction than what you're trying to take it. Because I used to have a co-host all the time, and they would ask these questions. I'm like, can't you tell we're going this way with this? And now you took us all the way over here to this totally different goalpost. And let's finish up on this, and then we'll go over to your other question.
Yeah, that's a whole nother layer of complexity. I'm lucky. I don't have to deal with that. So it's the podcast is me, and I've got my other guy who's the resident expert. So it's usually the two of us each week having a conversation. But if I have guests on, it's just me doing the interviews. So there's never more than two, luckily, because I can imagine that getting a little out of hand.
Well, it's not majorly, but it's just sometimes, it depends on who your co-host is. Because with my radio show, my co-host, we go on the same direction because it's pretty easy. We work well together, and it's the same thing. It's us, and then occasionally guests, once or twice a month if we're lucky. But that's weekly. Plus, we also do one daily. So we do, if you count the radio show, we do 6 days a week with him and I on a podcast, and that, yeah. So there's a daily one. And then I also do another one that with somebody else that's 2 times a week. And then I do another one with somebody else that's 2 times a week. So, yeah, it's pretty. So some of the other days that came on one of my podcasts, like, yeah, I did 12 podcasts in the last 3 months. I'm like, I do 13 a week. And that's not counting the ones I'm on.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well,
you get good at it after a while.
Well, no, it's just, I like having conversations. You like going to school. I like having conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody wants to talk on the phone anymore, so I do this. I mean, I deal with so much numbers and stuff. I have to talk to clients sometimes, but they want to, talk, through text because of their jobs or whatever. I just, thank goodness I found Chat GPT to help me write better. So,
yeah.
Please rewrite this for me so it's clear, and then they clean it up. You drop it in. Hey, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Thank goodness you wrote it for me. Yeah. I'm just saying, use tools. Yeah. So
Yeah, anybody can write well now. But I think that having good conversation is something that few people can do, and I think that's part of the appeal of podcasts to people, right? Is the good podcast, listening to a good conversation. It's something that just doesn't really organically take place in real life anymore. In a lot of cases, you don't really see people sitting down to talk. Everybody's too busy, or you know, too politically correct or polite to want to discuss difficult topics, or just don't know how. There's just a lot of barriers to having good conversations in real life for a lot of people, and so I think that a lot of people like to tune in to hear people talk about things that they don't hear out in the wild.
And I think a lot of people worry about offending people these days. But as you're older, I'm a vet. I don't worry about offending people anymore because you're going to offend them whether you try to or not. There's sometimes you can't control other people, how they're going to take certain things, because you can be very politically correct on and still offend somebody.
Yeah, I think that there's an important side of it is that it takes two to be offended, right? You have to have one person who's doing something offensive, and you have to have somebody else who's being offended. And so I think that we've as a society, we've sort of looked at it the wrong way in a lot of cases. Like, yes, you want to stop people from being offensive, um, to to the best of your ability, but we have freedom of speech. That's a right that we have. But I think that the better route to go is the route of the Stoics, right? And to say the only thing I can control is how I react to situations,
Mhm.
and the way I'm going to react is to not be offended, right? If somebody's going to say something, I'm going to try to understand their point of view. I'm going to try to understand why they think the way they do. And if I don't agree with it, I'm going to try to figure out why they're wrong or why I'm wrong, and what adjustments I need to make to my thinking in order to grow as a person, or a way of demonstrating or talking about the point that doesn't block communication with somebody else in order to demonstrate why they're wrong. But I think that it comes down to personal responsibility, right? At some point, you
Mhm.
have to say, I need to take responsibility for how I'm reacting to the way that I'm seeing things.
I totally agree because that's exactly how I feel. It's like, um, just because you're offended by what I said doesn't mean I'm wrong. I mean,
Right.
that's truly what it means. Freedom of speech is the reason it's supposed to be there. That's why, you know, people can do certain things that they're supposed to. That's why we went and signed online so people had freedom of speech and be able to say whatever. I might not want to hear it. Doesn't mean I have to listen to it. Doesn't mean but I should understand, like you said, why they're doing it because they have the right to do it. I don't have to agree with it. That's the rights of free speech. It's different than yelling fire in a crowded some auditorium where people get hurt. That's not freedom of speech. That's totally different. Being able to talk about certain things and say certain things, that is our right. If you're offended by it, you might want to look at why you're offended by it and see if it's me or if it's you or if it's just the way it is. You're going to be, because you can be offended by what someone says, doesn't mean you have to react to it, just like you said.
Yeah. And how is there supposed to be any growth in public discourse without having difficult conversations, right? I think that's part of the reason that things are as polarized as they are, is because people who disagree can't sit down and talk to each other. There's no method of communication that doesn't end with somebody getting mad, so mad that they can't talk to the other person. And I can't think of many topics that should be that way.
No, and I think that whoever is that person who's that mad can't talk about it, there's something they need to work on. Because you should
Yeah.
be able not have to get that upset about things. Typically, that means that something happened to you in your life that is more of the problem than what you're hearing, but it's just triggering something inside of you. And it gets to a point where we just need to be able to have a conversation. I lost you. You disconnected. I, um, if there wasn't technical issues, we wouldn't be a podcast. There's always something, always something. I
Yep.
mean, I thought it was a problem for me until I listened to Joe Rogan the other day, and they cut nothing out on the YouTube. It's like, I'm having difficulty hearing what's going, and they were going through the whole thing. It's like, really, I would have cut that out, but I guess you want real to understand that people go through these issues when you do podcasting. Something can happen, something can disconnect. Your laptop can die because it's not plugged in all the way. There's so many things that could happen.
Yeah, and I've been on some shows where people have cut out every or every breath or sort, and it just sounds unnatural and weird, you know. So yeah, I think that if you can cut out the big stuff like what we just had, then great. But I
I'm
don't
not
like
going to.
interrupting the natural flow of a conversation, you know.
I was on someone's podcast and I kept seeing jerk. I was like, what did he cut out? You know, I kept seeing my
Yeah,
head. Yeah, that little. What did he cut out? It's kind of like President Biden when he was speaking in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and they cut it 5 times because they were trying to hide something. But I'm just saying, don't hide that stuff. The only time you want to hide that stuff is if you're putting a little clip up on TikTok or any of those places. Take the ums and the spaces out so you can get that time down, and that so you can get all that in that little function and it sounds better. But for podcasts, those are natural. You need to work on that. If you're saying ums and ahs, and if you're saying right, that was a big thing. Because on stage, if you're on speaking on stage, you say right, that's the wrong word to say constantly. Good friend of mine, Brian Galke, we do a bunch of stuff together, and his big thing on stage was so. He said it so many times we made it into a drinking game.
yeah. It's and I think it's good because you were mentioning earlier, you know, you have a podcast where people talk about their failures, right? And I think that
Right.
you know, demonstrating that for audience members, right, is important. My early podcast episodes are really rough, but I don't
Everybody.
take them down because I want to hear people, and especially with philosophy, right? Philosophy is the art of trying to construct logical arguments and things. So that's not something that should be very fast paced or, you know, doesn't have any pauses or is anything like that. There's going to be struggle, and I'm going to put my foot in my mouth sometimes and have my argument, you know, defeated, and then have to rethink it and, you know, collaborate with, you know, and that's the way it should be.
Mhm. I totally agree. And it's like I cut up some stuff for the. Are you still there? Anyway, we'll pause this for a second. I guess that's just karma telling us that's the end of the show. Their time to go. Check your power. Again, we talked about it. You never know what's going on, but focus on if you're going to do a podcast, just focus on what you want to get across there. Don't worry about what your ums and ahs are. You're going to get better over time. I had a friend of mine go, man, you're so polished when he saw me on somebody cut up things. It's like you put in 10,000 hours, you could get polished too. And I still make mistakes. This morning, I couldn't get a word out. There's certain words I couldn't say. I was like, did I cut it out? No, I just kept trying to say it. Like you watch newscasters, when they mess up, they don't cut that stuff out. They have to keep going. It's live. And that's how I learned on radio because it was live radio. So there was no cutting anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, you listen to yourself enough and you start to pick up on those things and you get better at it. It's like anything else. You know, it's practice.
Joel, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to find you or look for your podcast, what's the name of your podcast?
It's From Nowhere to Nothing, and you can find it wherever you listen.
Everywhere where podcasts are available.
That's right.
All right, Joel, again, thanks for being on the show and thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of
My
fun.
pleasure.